The forgotten hills of Western Virginia hide many secrets beneath their misty veil. In the autumn of 1851, the small township of Blackwood Haven witnessed events so disturbing that county officials sealed all related documents for over a century. Newspaper clippings from that period mention only that a peculiar case involving a young boy caused considerable distress among the medical community, but the details remained conspicuously absent from public record. Historians have recently uncovered a collection of personal correspondences, medical journals, and witness testimonies that paint a troubling picture of what truly occurred. Of the 17 physicians who were summoned to examine the child, only 7 completed their evaluations. The others departed hastily, some abandoning distinguished careers entirely, relocating to distant states without explanation. Are you brave enough to learn what these doctors witnessed? What could cause educated men of science to turn away from a suffering child? The truth challenges our understanding of medicine, morality, and the human condition itself. It wasn't superstition or religious hysteria that drove these men away. It was something far more rational and infinitely more disturbing. Blackwood Haven rested in a narrow valley where sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of ancient oak and hickory trees. Even at midday, the town existed in perpetual twilight, the air heavy with moisture and the scent of decaying leaves. Visitors often remarked how sounds carried strangely there, sometimes muffled to silence, other times amplified to unnatural clarity. The township had prospered modestly from lumber and coal, but remained isolated from neighboring communities by treacherous mountain roads that became impassable during winter months. The Merrick family had lived in Blackwood Haven for 3 generations. Isaiah Merrick was a respected mine operator whose pragmatic approach to business had earned him considerable influence in local affairs. His wife, Eleanor, came from a well-educated northern family and had brought with her progressive ideas about child rearing and education that were viewed with suspicion by many townspeople. Their only son, Nathaniel, was born after several miscarriages, considered a blessing until his peculiar condition began to manifest. The 1850s marked a pivotal transition in American medicine. Universities were beginning to standardize medical education, challenging traditional practices and folk remedies. Physicians increasingly embraced scientific methodologies, eager to distance themselves from accusations of quackery. Yet this emerging profession remained deeply entangled with prevailing social hierarchies and moral frameworks. The concept of divine design still influenced medical understanding. Human anatomy was considered perfect by divine creation, and deviations were often viewed through a lens of moral failing or punishment. Dr. James Harrington, the county's most respected physician, kept meticulous records of his cases. His handwriting, normally precise and controlled, becomes increasingly erratic in the entries concerning young Nathaniel Merrick. The final page contains only a single sentence, the pen having torn through the paper in several places. Some knowledge was never meant for discovery. Thomas Collins, a local hunter, was the first to notice something unusual. While tracking deer at dawn in the woods behind the Merrick estate, he observed a small figure moving among the trees. Thinking it a child who had wandered from home, he approached cautiously so as not to frighten the boy. What he witnessed instead stopped him in his tracks. The child was gathering something from the ground, Collins later testified, moving in a manner that weren't natural. When he turned, I saw his face clearly in the morning light. He recognized me, smiled even, but those eyes, there was something ancient in them eyes, something that knew things. I've tracked predators all my life, seen wolves and bears up close, but never felt the kind of dread that washed over me in that moment. Collins reported what he'd seen to the town constable, who dismissed his concerns as exaggeration or the effects of early morning whiskey. The hunter became increasingly agitated as the days passed, unable to shake the image of the boy's eyes from his mind. He began keeping watch on the Merrick property, recording the comings and goings of visitors, particularly noting the physicians who arrived with increasing frequency. "There's something unnatural about that child," he confided to Reverend Abernathy. "Not in a way that suggests evil or possession, as some folks are whispering. Something else entirely. Something I ain't got words for." The Reverend advised Collins to keep his observations to himself, warning that such talk could harm the reputation of a prominent family. But the hunter could not forget what he had seen, particularly the objects the boy had been collecting and arranging in patterns that, try as he might, Collins could not interpret or reproduce in his journal. The first physician to examine Nathaniel was Dr. Harrington, summoned by Isaiah Merrick when the boy was just 6 years old. The initial concern seemed routine enough. The child had stopped speaking entirely for several weeks. The doctor's notes indicate a thorough examination revealed no physical abnormalities in the throat or mouth, and he suspected a psychological cause, perhaps trauma or nervous temperament. 3 months later, Harrington was called back. Nathaniel had begun speaking again, but something about his speech pattern had changed. He used complex medical terminology and references to anatomical structures that no child his age could possibly know. More concerning to his parents, he had begun making detailed predictions about the health of household members and visitors, identifying conditions that showed no outward symptoms. The child approached Mrs. Whitaker at a dinner gathering, Eleanor Merrick wrote in her diary, placed his hand on her abdomen, and spoke in the most clinical manner about a mass developing with irregular borders. 3 weeks later, she began experiencing pain in that exact location. The surgeon in Richmond later confirmed what my son had somehow known. By the spring of 1851, Nathaniel had changed dramatically. Once playful and affectionate, he became withdrawn and methodical. He filled notebooks with drawings of human anatomy so precise they resembled medical illustrations, despite having no access to such references. He slept only during daylight hours, and would be found at night standing motionless at his window or wandering the halls, muttering sequences of numbers and Latin phrases. The most troubling development, however, was his apparent ability to diagnose internal conditions with merely a touch. After correctly identifying a heart defect in a visiting cousin, later confirmed by a specialist in Baltimore, word spread rapidly through the community. Some viewed the boy as blessed with divine insight. Others whispered about unnatural powers and influences. Isaiah Merrick, desperate to understand his son's condition, began inviting physicians from neighboring counties and eventually from as far away as Philadelphia and Boston. These men arrived with scientific curiosity, but departed visibly shaken. None would discuss their findings publicly, and several refused payment for their consultations. Dr. William Everett from the Pennsylvania Medical College wrote to a colleague after his visit, "I have witnessed something today that defies all rational explanation. The boy's knowledge exceeds that of our most accomplished anatomists, yet he has had no formal education." When asked how he knows these things, he replied only that they speak to me from within. "I confess this experience has severely undermined my confidence in our current understanding of the human mind." Parents in Blackwood Haven began keeping their children away from the Merrick home. Teachers reported that students refused to discuss Nathaniel, crossing themselves if his name was mentioned. The local minister counseled patience and compassion, but privately advised Isaiah Merrick to consider specialized institutions in the North that might better address his son's unique condition. The changes in Nathaniel became increasingly pronounced. His skin grew pale from avoiding sunlight, and dark circles formed beneath his eyes. He refused most food, subsisting primarily on raw vegetables and occasionally raw meat, which he consumed with mechanical precision. He displayed no emotion when spoken to, responding only to direct questions about medical matters, which he answered with disturbing accuracy. Most concerning to his mother were the periods when Nathaniel seemed to disappear mentally, staring unblinking for hours before suddenly returning to awareness with new and increasingly bizarre knowledge. He speaks of structures and systems within the human body that are not documented in any medical text, Eleanor confided in her journal. When I asked how he could know such things, he looked through me rather than at me and said, "I have seen inside myself." By midsummer, the Merricks had consulted 13 different physicians, each more distinguished than the last. None could offer an explanation or treatment plan. Several suggested the boy's condition might represent a new form of mental disturbance, while others hinted at more supernatural explanations. All agreed that the case warranted further study, yet none were willing to undertake that study themselves. The turning point came when Dr. Harrison Wells, a renowned neurologist from Boston, spent 3 days observing Nathaniel. On the final evening, Isaiah found Wells packing his belongings with trembling hands, his face ashen. "I cannot remain in this house another night," the doctor declared. "There are boundaries to human knowledge that should not be crossed. What resides within your son is beyond our current capacity to comprehend or address. For your family's safety, and for his, seek no further medical consultation. Some conditions are not meant to be studied." With these ominous words, the doctor departed into the night, leaving the Merrick family more isolated than ever with their increasingly enigmatic child. As autumn descended on Blackwood Haven, the Merrick household retreated further into isolation. Servants resigned one by one, citing vague concerns about their health or family obligations requiring their attention elsewhere. In truth, they could no longer bear the weight of the unexplained phenomena that had become commonplace within those walls. The sounds of movement from empty rooms, objects relocating without human intervention, and most disturbingly, the boys' uncanny awareness of their most private physical ailments. Margaret Wilson, who had served as housekeeper for nearly a decade, was the last to leave. "The child approached me as I was preparing the morning meal," she later recounted to the town midwife. "He placed his hand upon my wrist, not in an affectionate manner as he once did, but clinically, like a physician taking a pulse. Then he spoke in a voice that held none of the warmth or uncertainty of childhood. 'The irregular rhythm suggests valvular inefficiency,' he said. 'You have approximately 7 months before complete failure occurs.' Wilson departed that afternoon. 6 months later, she collapsed while hanging laundry and never regained consciousness. The coroner's report cited heart failure as the cause of death. With the household staff gone, Eleanor Merrick shouldered the burden of domestic responsibilities while attempting to educate her son at home, as the local schoolmaster had firmly refused his attendance. Isaiah increasingly buried himself in business affairs, often staying at his office in town rather than returning home in the evenings. Their once strong marriage began to fracture under the strain of their extraordinary circumstances. "I cannot reach him anymore," Eleanor wrote of her son. "There are moments when I glimpse the sweet child he once was. A fleeting expression, a gesture that recalls his former self. But these glimpses are becoming rarer. Something else occupies the space where my Nathaniel should be. Something that watches with calculating interest, as if we are specimens under examination." By late October, Isaiah made a desperate decision. Having exhausted conventional medical resources, he reached out to Dr. Edgar Pruitt of the Westbrook Sanitarium, a relatively new institution in Northern Virginia that specialized in unusual mental conditions. Pruitt's controversial methods had earned him a mixed reputation in medical circles, but his willingness to accept patients rejected by other facilities made him the Merrick's last hope. Pruitt arrived on a cold November morning, the first snow of the season dusting the ground. Unlike the previous physicians, he displayed no apprehension upon meeting Nathaniel. His clinical detachment seemed impervious to the unnerving qualities that had disturbed his colleagues. For 3 days, he observed the boy, conducted various tests, and reviewed the notes left by previous doctors. The subject displays extraordinary knowledge acquisition without identifiable sources, Pruitt wrote in his evaluation. The phenomenon appears progressive, with accelerating manifestations. Of particular interest is the subject's ability to access information about internal physiological states, both his own and those of others, with a precision that exceeds current diagnostic capabilities. What distinguished Pruitt from his predecessors was his unflinching scientific curiosity. Where others had recoiled, he leaned in. Where they had seen boundaries not to be crossed, he saw only the limitations of contemporary understanding. Most significantly, he offered the Merricks something no one else had: a plan. "Your son represents an unprecedented opportunity for medical advancement," he explained to the parents. "At Westbrook, we have the facilities and expertise to properly study his condition. With your permission, I would like to admit him for a period of observation and controlled testing." Exhausted and increasingly fearful in their own home, the Merricks reluctantly agreed. Arrangements were made for Nathaniel to be transported to Westbrook the following week. Eleanor spent those final days alternating between grief and hope, sewing name labels into her son's clothing and packing his favorite books, though he had shown no interest in them for months. The night before his scheduled departure, something unexpected occurred. Mary Holloway, a young woman who assisted the local midwife, was returning home from attending a difficult birth when she passed the Merrick property. Movement at an upstairs window caught her attention. The boy, standing perfectly still, staring directly at her despite the considerable distance and pre-dawn darkness. He raised his hand as if in greeting, she later told the constable. Then, with deliberate motions, he began to gesture in a pattern I recognized from my work with Dr. Patterson. It was the hand language he uses to communicate with deaf patients. The boy was signing words to me. Mary, one of the few literate women in the community, had assisted Dr. Patterson in documenting this manual communication system. She understood enough to comprehend the message being conveyed across the distance. Help, not illness. Discovery. Troubled by this encounter, Mary hesitated at the crossroads. Proper behavior dictated she continue home and not interfere with the affairs of a prominent family. Yet something in the boy's message and the deliberate way he had sought her out specifically, someone with the knowledge to understand his communication, compelled her to approach the house. She found the back door unlocked and moved quietly through the silent kitchen. Soft lamplight spilled from beneath the door of what appeared to be a study. Inside, she discovered Eleanor Merrick asleep at a writing desk, an empty laudanum bottle nearby. Carefully avoiding waking the exhausted mother, Mary continued upstairs, drawn by an inexplicable certainty of where to find the boy. Nathaniel sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by dozens of papers covered in writing and anatomical drawings. Unlike the vacant expression he typically wore in recent months, his eyes were alert and focused. When Mary entered, he immediately began signing. "They don't understand," his hands conveyed. "Not sick. Learning." Over the next hour, through this silent language, Nathaniel communicated something so extraordinary that Mary struggled to comprehend its implications. He described experiencing what he called inward vision, an ability to perceive the internal structures of living organisms, including his own body, with perfect clarity. This perception had begun gradually, but intensified rapidly over the past year. "See how blood moves," he signed. "See how thoughts form. See how life works." The boy explained that he had attempted to share his observations with the physicians, believing his condition represented a valuable scientific opportunity. Instead, most had responded with fear or disbelief. Only Dr. Pruitt had shown genuine interest, but Nathaniel had sensed something disturbing in the doctor's intentions. "Not study with me," his hands expressed urgently. "Study on me." Mary realized with growing horror that the boy feared Pruitt planned not to collaborate with him as a medical anomaly, but to subject him to invasive examination. The doctor's interest was not in Nathaniel's experiences, but in the physiological mechanism behind them, a mechanism he intended to isolate through whatever means necessary. "He will take me apart to see how I see," Nathaniel signed, his young face grave with understanding beyond his years. Mary faced an impossible decision. Interfering with the Merrick's arrangements could cost her position in the community and possibly legal consequences. Yet the intelligence in the boy's eyes and the methodical precision of his communication convinced her his fears were warranted. "I need to document everything," she signed back. "Evidence of your abilities. Something to show the right people." Through the remainder of the night, Mary transcribed Nathaniel's observations about human physiology. He described structures and processes that contradicted established medical knowledge, microscopic components of blood that moved with purpose, intricate networks of nerve fibers more complex than any anatomist had documented, and subtle electrical currents that flowed through tissue in patterns correlating with thought and emotion. As dawn approached, they heard movement downstairs. Isaiah had returned home to prepare for Dr. Pruitt's arrival later that morning. Mary quickly gathered the pages of notes and concealed them in her cloak. "I'll find someone who will listen," she promised. "Someone who will understand the importance of what you're experiencing without wanting to destroy it." She slipped out as she had come in, unnoticed by the distracted parents making final preparations for their son's departure. Her mind raced with the implications of what she had learned and the urgency of finding legitimate medical authorities who would approach Nathaniel's case with both scientific rigor and ethical consideration. Dr. Pruitt arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, accompanied by 2 attendants. The transfer proceeded efficiently, with Nathaniel displaying neither resistance nor emotion as he was escorted to the waiting carriage. Eleanor wept silently, while Isaiah maintained a stoic facade, both parents convinced they were making the only choice available to them. Mary watched from a distance, hidden among the trees that bordered the property. The look Nathaniel cast in her direction before entering the carriage contained both acknowledgement and warning. Whatever extraordinary perception he possessed, she understood it came with terrible vulnerability. For 3 days, Mary worked feverishly to organize Nathaniel's notes and add her own observations from their interaction. She created a comprehensive document detailing both his unusual abilities and his rational fear of Pruitt's intentions. On the 4th day, she traveled to Richmond to seek out Dr. William Bennett, a physician known for his progressive approach to medical research and ethical treatment of patients. "I found him skeptical but willing to listen," she recorded in her personal journal. When he reviewed the anatomical descriptions, his demeanor changed entirely. "These structures," he said, pointing to Nathaniel's drawing of cellular components. "I've observed similar formations in my microscopy work, but this level of detail, it's unprecedented." Bennett agreed to travel to Westbrook Sanitarium to evaluate Nathaniel personally. They departed the next morning, but upon arriving discovered alarming circumstances. Pruitt had registered the boy under a different name and classified him as a charity case with no family connections, effectively erasing his identity and eliminating any oversight of his treatment. Through careful questioning of junior staff members, they learned Nathaniel had been placed in the sanitarium's research wing, a separate building where Pruitt conducted his most experimental procedures, hidden from the view of conventional visitors and inspectors. "We must proceed cautiously," Bennett advised. "Pruitt has powerful connections, and direct confrontation could result in evidence being destroyed. I'll request a formal tour of the facilities tomorrow, using my position to gain access to the research areas. Meanwhile, you should return to Blackwood Haven and inform the Merricks of our concerns." Mary reluctantly agreed, departing with a sense of foreboding that intensified with each mile of her journey home. Upon reaching Blackwood Haven, she found the community in turmoil. A fire had broken out at the Merrick home the previous night, destroying a significant portion of the structure. Isaiah had suffered severe burns attempting to contain the blaze, while Eleanor was being treated for smoke inhalation at a neighbor's home. More disturbing were the rumors already circulating that the fire had started in Nathaniel's room, that strange lights had been seen in the windows before the first flames appeared, that unnatural sounds had been heard by those first on the scene. The tragedy was quickly being incorporated into the community's growing mythology surrounding the unusual child. Mary recognized the opportunity within the chaos. With the parents incapacitated and local attention focused on the fire, she could speak more freely about her concerns regarding Westbrook Sanitarium. She approached Reverend Abernathy, who had always shown compassion toward the Merrick family despite the community's growing suspicion. "Something unconscionable is happening at that institution," she told him, sharing a carefully edited version of her discoveries. "The boy is being held against his will, under a false identity, for purposes of experimentation rather than treatment." The Reverend, though troubled by her account, counseled patience and proper procedures. "These are serious allegations against a respected physician," he reminded her. "We must proceed through appropriate channels to ensure—" His words were interrupted by the arrival of a messenger bearing an urgent telegram from Dr. Bennett in Richmond. The message, brief and cryptic, chilled Mary to her core. "Patient missing, evidence of procedure, Pruitt claims escape, blood found, return immediately." Mary arrived in Richmond to find Dr. Bennett disheveled and anxious. He locked his office door before speaking. "What I witnessed at Westbrook violates every principle of medical ethics," he whispered. "Patients are kept isolated, many sedated, all documented like laboratory specimens rather than human beings." Bennett had found no sign of Nathaniel until discovering a surgical schedule listing Subject 27, exploratory cranial procedure, for the following morning. When he requested to see the surgical facilities, he found instruments with no legitimate medical purpose and Nathaniel's drawings of neural structures no textbook had documented. Pruitt claimed the boy had injured himself attempting escape, showing Bennett a room with bloodstains and a broken window that appeared suspiciously staged. The blood patterns were inconsistent with an escape attempt, and the window glass had shattered outward rather than inward. "Something happened to that child," Bennett concluded. "Whether Pruitt has hidden him elsewhere or something worse, I cannot say." Mary shared that the fire at the Merrick home had destroyed all evidence of Nathaniel's condition, the timing suspiciously convenient. Their discussion was interrupted by a delivery, a package addressed to "the doctor concerned with Subject 27, containing a hand-drawn map and note. Midnight. Come alone. Bring medical supplies." The map led to an area 15 miles outside Richmond, known for limestone caves. Bennett followed the directions that night, arriving at a cave entrance where he was met by Thomas Collins, the hunter who had first observed Nathaniel in the woods. Collins appeared severely injured, with a bandaged head covering one eye. Inside the cave lay Nathaniel, unconscious but breathing. Bennett administered a stimulant, while Collins explained how he had followed the boy to Westbrook, secured work as a groundskeeper, and witnessed Pruitt conducting an unethical procedure. Pruitt had the boy strapped to a table, claiming he was mapping the source of his unusual perceptions, Collins said. He had created a diversion, helping Nathaniel escape through service tunnels. Both had been injured in the process. Nathaniel stirred, recognizing Bennett immediately. "Not much time," he whispered, grasping the doctor's wrist. "See what I see." What followed would remain in Bennett's private journal, but never be shared widely with the medical community. For several seconds, Bennett experienced Nathaniel's unique perception, seeing physiological processes within his own body with impossible clarity. Neural pathways firing, cellular components moving, chemicals exchanging across membranes. "It was not hallucination," Bennett later wrote, "but perception beyond our understanding, a window into biological functions at a level our instruments cannot detect. Not supernatural, but perhaps an evolutionary advancement or activation of dormant perceptual pathways." The demonstration left Nathaniel weaker. Collins explained that each time the boy shared his ability, his strength diminished further. Pruitt's procedure damaged something essential. Bennett worked through the night to stabilize the child's condition. By dawn, Nathaniel had regained consciousness but remained critical. He communicated enough to explain his extraordinary condition. "Not just seeing," he struggled to articulate, "becoming part of what I see, learning from inside." This explained why physicians had reacted with alarm. The boy's knowledge challenged fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between observer and subject, mind and body. It wasn't merely new information, but a new way of obtaining information that upended scientific methodology itself. As morning light filtered into the cave, it became clear that Nathaniel was failing. Whatever damage Pruitt had caused was beyond 19th century medicine to repair. He knew he wouldn't survive, Collins said quietly. That's why he was determined to reach someone who would understand the importance of what he could do. In his final hours, Nathaniel experienced moments of remarkable lucidity, conveying as much of his perception as possible. Bennett filled pages with observations that would later inspire significant medical advances, though their source would remain unattributed. Mary arrived with a magistrate to document what had occurred. The boy recognized her immediately. "You kept your promise," he whispered. "I found someone who would listen," she confirmed, tears streaming down her face. Nathaniel died peacefully just after midday. The magistrate authorized an investigation into Westbrook Sanitarium, which revealed disturbing practices throughout Pruitt's facility. The sanitarium was closed within a year, but Pruitt disappeared before facing justice, with rumors placing him in Europe, continuing his work under different auspices. The fire at the Merrick home was ruled arson, though no perpetrator was identified. Isaiah and Eleanor left Virginia permanently, settling in the West under different names. Collins never fully recovered from his injuries, living as a recluse and refusing to discuss the events except with Bennett, who visited annually to document the lingering effects of his exposure to the boy's perception. Bennett established a small research institute exploring the relationship between consciousness and physiology. His published work, carefully edited to exclude direct references to Nathaniel, introduced concepts that initially faced ridicule but gained acceptance as technology advanced to confirm the boy's observations. Mary joined Bennett's institute as a researcher. Together, they developed ethical protocols for medical research, emphasizing collaboration with subjects rather than objectification. Principles inspired by what Nathaniel might have experienced had his condition been approached with understanding rather than fear. The sealed records remained inaccessible for decades until 1947, when a historian discovered their significance. By then, many of Bennett's once controversial theories had become foundational concepts in neuroscience, though few knew their true origin. In his final publication, Bennett offered a reflection that seemed to reference the case he never publicly disclosed. When science prioritizes discovery over humanity, progress becomes merely another form of barbarism. The greatest scientific advances come not from treating living beings as objects of study, but from recognizing them as partners in understanding, each with perspectives that may transcend our current frameworks of comprehension. Nathaniel Merrick was buried in an unmarked grave near Richmond, his extraordinary mind returned to the earth without recognition. Yet the ripples of his brief existence continued to influence medical understanding for generations, an unacknowledged revolution born from the mind of a child who saw beyond the limitations of human perception. A child that doctors first refused to study, then studied in exactly the wrong way.